When you picture the Arabian Peninsula, what comes to mind? Endless dunes of shimmering sand, baked by an unforgiving sun? The glint of oil, the lifeblood of the modern world? Or perhaps the futuristic skylines of Dubai and Riyadh, piercing the heavens as monuments to human ambition? For centuries, this was the accepted image. A harsh, relatively young landscape, whose deep history was largely hidden. But what if I told you that this entire image is wrong? That hidden beneath the sand, and hiding in plain sight for millennia, is a secret that rewrites the very history of human civilization? A vast network of stone structures, so enormous they can only be truly appreciated from space. And the most chilling part? They are over 12,000 years old. And to this day, no one can definitively explain why they were built. Before the first stone was laid at Stonehenge, before the first pharaoh dreamt of a pyramid thousands of years before the birth of writing itself, forgotten peoples in a forgotten landscape undertook one of the largest and most mysterious construction projects in human history. Archaeologists call them mastodons. The name comes from the Arabic word for rectangle, and from a satellite's perspective, that's what they look like. Thousands of them, scattered across the deserts of northwest Saudi Arabia. Simple, stark, rectangular outlines drawn upon the earth. Some are modest, about 20 meters in length. Others are monolithic, true giants stretching for over 600 meters, longer than the Empire State Building is tall. Since their rediscovery in recent decades, over 1,600 of these enigmatic structures have been catalogued. Think about that. Not one or two, but a coordinated, widespread architectural phenomenon, built by a people with no known written language, no centralized government we can identify, and no cities. This fact alone presents us with a staggering puzzle. What could possibly motivate a prehistoric society to build on such a colossal scale, over and over again, across thousands of square kilometers? What belief, what purpose, what desperate need drove them to haul thousands of tons of rock under the Arabian sky? This is the question that keeps archaeologists awake at night. Because the mastodons defy every simple explanation. They are one of the oldest and most profound mysteries on the planet. To even begin to understand them, we have to perform an act of imagination. We have to erase the desert, because the people who built these structures did not live in the Arabia we know today. They lived in a lost world. Travel back with me not just a few centuries, but 12 millennia. The great ice sheets that covered much of the northern hemisphere are in their final retreat. The world is warming. And in Arabia, this warming brings something we can barely fathom today: rain. This was the African humid period, a time when the monsoon rains that now fall over Central Africa pushed much further north. The Arabian Peninsula was transformed. This wasn't a desert. It was a vibrant savanna. Picture rolling grasslands teeming with wild cattle, known as aurochs, with gazelle, with ostrich. Picture seasonal lakes and winding rivers cutting through the landscape. The air was filled with the sounds of life. This was the Green Arabia. And it was in this lush, prehistoric paradise that a new kind of human society was beginning to dawn. And with it, a new, monumental idea that they would carve into the very face of the earth. An idea we are only now beginning to uncover. Let's start with how we even found them. For thousands of years, the mastodons went unnoticed by the outside world. Bedouin tribes knew of them, referring to them as the works of the old men. But their true scale and significance were a complete mystery. They are often low to the ground, their walls collapsed and weathered by time. Walking right past one, you might just see a long, messy line of rocks. Their secret was only revealed when we took to the sky. In the 1920s, pilots flying airmail routes across the region reported seeing strange stone formations, but it wasn't until the 21st century, with the advent of commercial satellite imagery and platforms like Google Earth, that the true picture emerged. Suddenly, researchers could zoom out, and what they saw was breathtaking. Not just a few structures, but a vast, interconnected tapestry of them. It was a revelation, a lost chapter of human history, hiding in plain sight on our computer screens. Archaeologists like Dr. Hugh Kennedy and his team at the University of Western Australia began the painstaking work of mapping them from satellite photos. Realizing they were looking at a prehistoric construction project on a scale previously thought impossible for this time period. But mapping them from orbit was one thing. Understanding them required getting your boots on the ground. And once archaeologists began excavating, the mystery only deepened. So what exactly is a mustatil? Imagine two long parallel walls. They are not tall, rarely more than a meter or so high. They are crudely built, just piles of local sandstone slabs and boulders. These two walls run perfectly straight, creating a long, narrow corridor or courtyard. At one end, which archaeologists call the head, is a thicker wall, often containing a small, distinct chamber or niche. This head is always the most well-constructed part of the structure. At the other end, the foot, the walls typically taper inwards, creating a very narrow, clear entrance. And that's it. There are no roofs, no side rooms, no complex features, just this stark, elongated rectangular shape. They are all built on a similar plan, but what's fascinating is that they seem to be built with a specific audience in mind, or perhaps a specific direction in mind. The entrances often open onto a specific geological feature, like a prominent rock outcrop, as if the landscape itself was part of the design. Immediately, the obvious theories come to mind. Could they have been for farming? Unlikely. The soil inside is no different from the soil outside. Were they animal pens? Pens for corralling those wild aurochs or early domesticated cattle. This was an early popular theory, but it doesn't hold up. The walls are far too low to contain a panicked herd of cattle, some of which were massive creatures. And the single, tiny entrance would be incredibly impractical for herding. You couldn't get a large group of animals in or out efficiently. All right then, were they defensive structures? Fortifications? Again, no. The low walls offer no real protection. They have no towers, no ramparts, no strategic placement on high ground. In fact, many are built on low, open plains. They are the opposite of a fortress. So they weren't for farming, they weren't for herding, and they weren't for fighting. And they weren't for living either. Every simple, practical explanation you can think of dissolves upon inspection. They are architectural puzzles. They seem to serve a purpose that was entirely symbolic. To understand that purpose, we have to look closer at the clues they left behind, buried for millennia in the Arabian dust. Clues that would point to a forgotten religion, a sacred animal, and a series of rituals performed at the dawn of civilization. The first and most important question for archaeologists was a simple one. How old are they? How do you put a date on a simple stone wall in the middle of a vast desert? There are no inscriptions to read, no pottery styles to compare. For decades, their age was a complete guess. But modern science has given us a way to make the stones themselves speak. Archaeologists have a few remarkable tools, and one of them is a technique called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL. It sounds complex, but the idea behind it is beautifully simple. Think of a grain of sand as a tiny, rechargeable battery. As it sits buried in the ground, it's constantly soaking up natural radiation from the soil around it, storing that energy. The longer it's buried, the more energy it stores. When archaeologists carefully take a sample, making sure it's never exposed to sunlight, they can bring it back to a lab. There, they hit that grain of sand with a specific type of light. This forces the grain to release all its stored energy in a tiny flash of its own light. By measuring how bright that flash is, scientists can calculate, with incredible accuracy, the last time that grain of sand saw the sun. When they used OSL on the sediment buried beneath the mustatil walls, they were dating the very moment the foundation stones were laid, sealing the sand underneath in darkness for millennia. And they got another lucky break. Inside the head of one particularly well-preserved mustatil, they found something that gave them an even more precise timestamp: charcoal from an ancient hearth. This they could test using radiocarbon dating. When the results from both tests came back, the archaeological community was stunned. The charcoal dated to around 7,000 BCE. That's 9,000 years ago. The OSL dates pushed the tradition back even further, suggesting the earliest mustatils could approach 10,000 BCE, up to 12,000 years ago. Let's put that into perspective. This isn't just old. This is an echo from a different human world. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built around 2600 BCE. These structures are more than twice as old. Stonehenge, in its most famous form, was erected around 2500 BCE. The people of Arabia were building on a monumental scale 4,000 years before that. This was the dawn of the Neolithic period, the New Stone Age, a time when humanity was just beginning to experiment with farming and settled life. And yet here, in what we thought was a historical backwater, was evidence of sophisticated, organized, large-scale communal activity that dwarfed anything else happening on the planet at that time. They now had the when, and it was a much, much deeper when than anyone had ever imagined. But this just made the central question even more urgent. What on earth were they doing in there 9,000 years ago? The answer, it turns out, lay buried in that same special chamber at the head of the Mustatil. As excavators painstakingly scraped away the layers of time, they began to find bones. Now, finding animal bones at an ancient site is not unusual. People have to eat. But this was different. These weren't the scattered remains of a campsite meal. Not at all. What they found was a carefully arranged deposit of horns and skulls, the most symbolic parts of an animal. They found the remains of gazelle, ibex, and small goats. But dominating the collection was something else, something far more significant. They found the horns of both wild aurochs, the massive, fearsome ancestors of modern cattle, and early domesticated cattle. These weren't just tossed into a pit. They were presented. Some of the skulls had been placed directly on top of the upright stone in the central chamber, as if making a direct offering to whatever it represented. This was a deliberate, curated collection of animal remains. This wasn't a garbage dump. It was an altar. This discovery was a lightning bolt. It recontextualized everything. The long, processional walkways, the focal point of the head chamber, and now the discovery of ritual offerings. A picture began to form of a complex and widespread belief system, a religion that archaeologists now tentatively call a cattle cult. It appears that for these Neolithic people, cattle were everything. They were a source of food and resources, yes, but they were more than that. They were sacred. The power, the vitality, the life-giving nature of these animals, both hunted and herded, seems to have been at the very center of their spiritual world. And the Mustitals, they were the grand cathedrals for this forgotten faith. These weren't just gateways to nowhere. They were gateways to the sacred. Vast, open-air temples designed for a ritual purpose we are only now beginning to comprehend. The evidence suggested a place where communities would gather, perform ceremonies, and leave offerings to their gods, or to the spirits of the animals themselves, to ensure a successful hunt, a healthy herd, or the continued blessings of that green Arabia they called home. We now have the where, Northwest Arabia. We have the when, an astonishing 9,000 years ago. And we have the what, ritual offerings related to a cattle cult. But this is where the hard evidence ends, and the great debate begins. Knowing these facts is one thing. Putting ourselves into the minds of these ancient people to understand the ultimate why, that is the real challenge. And it has given rise to some fascinating, competing theories about what truly happened inside these stone corridors. The first and most widely accepted theory is that the Mustitals were built for ritual processions. Picture it. The entire structure is a stage for a sacred drama. A community, perhaps several villages or nomadic clans, gathers at the wide-open landscape before the narrow entrance. An elder or a shaman begins a chant. The ceremony starts. One by one, or in a small group, they enter the Mustatil, walking the long, straight path between the low walls. This journey is deliberate. The outside world is shut out. Their focus is drawn forward, down the hundreds of meters of the stone corridor, towards the head. It's a symbolic journey, pilgrimage in miniature. As they reach the head, they enter the most sacred space. Here, the priest or ritual leader performs the ceremony. Perhaps it's a prayer for rain. Perhaps it's a coming-of-age ritual for young hunters. Or perhaps it's a ceremony of thanks, where they present the skulls and horns of their most prized animals as an offering to the supernatural forces that govern their world. The offering is placed in the chamber, the ritual is complete, and the procession files back out. The scale of the Mustatil suddenly makes sense in this context. It wasn't about keeping things in. It was about guiding the movement and focus of people. It was about creating a sense of awe and reverence through architecture. But there's another powerful theory, which suggests the purpose of the mastodons might have been less about what happened inside them, and more about the very act of building them. Think about the society that created these. They weren't a unified empire with a king and a bureaucracy. They were likely smaller, semi-nomadic groups of herders and hunters. But the climate was changing. The Green Arabia was a time of plenty, but it wasn't stable. Populations were growing and groups were coming into contact and competition with each other more and more. In this world, how do you build a community? How do you forge a common identity? You build something together. According to this theory, the mastodons were immense communal projects. The act of quarrying the stone, hauling it, and placing it required the cooperation of hundreds of people. It was a social glue. It forged bonds between families and clans. Completing a mastodon wasn't just building a temple. It was a statement of unity. It was a monument to their shared culture and their ability to work together. And once built, they served another purpose. They were territorial markers. In a landscape without fences or border posts, these massive, unmistakable structures were a powerful message to any outsiders. This is our land. This is our territory. These are our gods. They staked a claim on the spiritual landscape, and by extension, the physical one. This is where the academic debate becomes a fascinating puzzle, and honestly, it's where I want to bring you into the investigation. We have these two powerful theories, one focused on the spiritual ritual inside, the other on the social statement of its construction. Are they mutually exclusive? Probably not. They likely work together. But which one do you think was the primary driver? The sacred procession or the monumental social marker? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. It's in dialogues like this, sharing our perspectives, that we can all get closer to the truth behind these ancient mysteries. It really helps to see what resonates with you all. Of course, whenever you have a mystery this old and this strange, there is always another, more tantalizing possibility to consider, one that looks not to the earth, but to the sky. This brings us into the fascinating, and sometimes controversial, field of archaeoastronomy, the study of how ancient people understood and interacted with the cosmos. For any prehistoric culture, the sky wasn't just a beautiful backdrop. It was a clock, a calendar, and a compass all rolled into one. The movements of the sun dictated the seasons. The phases of the moon marked the passing of shorter time. The positions of the stars provided a map for navigation and told them when migratory herds might arrive. The sky was deeply, intrinsically linked to survival. And what is linked to survival is almost always linked to religion. So, the question is unavoidable. Could these massive structures be giant celestial pointers? Were the mastodon builders encoding a cosmic knowledge into their architecture? It's an alluring idea, isn't it? The thought of a Neolithic shaman standing at the head of a 600-meter corridor, watching the sun rise on the winter solstice and perfectly align with the entrance. It would be a powerful confirmation of their place in the universe, a sign that their world was in order. Researchers have been looking for these patterns, plotting the orientations of hundreds of mastodons against the movements of the sun, moon, and key stars as they would have appeared 9,000 years ago. And the results so far are ambiguous. There is no smoking gun. While some mastodons seem to have a general east-west orientation, which would naturally align with the rising and setting sun, there isn't a single, unifying astronomical alignment that fits all or even most of them. They don't all point to the solstice sunrise, or to the setting of a specific star like Sirius. The pattern, if there is one, is much more complex, or perhaps it was never the primary focus. This doesn't mean the sky played no role. It's very possible that the timing of their rituals was dictated by celestial events. A ceremony might only take place on a full moon or at the spring equinox. But the idea of the structures themselves being giant, precise astronomical observatories, as a singular explanation, the evidence just isn't there yet. It remains an intriguing, but unproven, piece of the puzzle. So we have these powerful theories: ritual procession grounds, social bonding projects,
territorial markers,
perhaps even with a touch of cosmic reverence, a complex tapestry of belief and society. This was a culture that was organized, sophisticated, and deeply invested in its view of the world. But this raises one final, haunting question. If this culture was so vibrant, so successful, where did they go? Why, after centuries of building, did they simply stop? The answer, once again, is written not in stone, but in the climate itself. The very forces that gave birth to the Green Arabia would be the same forces that erased it. The Holocene humid period, that magical time of rains and savannas, was not permanent. It was a climatic anomaly, and around 6000 BCE it began to end. The monsoon rains, which had pushed so far north, began to retreat. The shift was probably imperceptible at first. A rainy season that was a little shorter than the last. A lake that didn't quite fill up to its previous shoreline. But over generations, the trend became undeniable and catastrophic. The seasonal lakes began to shrink, their edges cracking in the growing heat. The lush savanna grasses that fed the aurochs and gazelle turned yellow, then brown, becoming brittle scrub. The rivers that had carved paths through the landscape dwindled to streams, and then to dusty, empty trenches. The desert was returning. For the people of the cattle cult, this was an apocalypse in slow motion. Their entire way of life was tethered to this specific environment. The wild herds they hunted moved on, searching for water and grazing lands that no longer existed. The grazing lands for their own domesticated cattle withered away, turning to sand. Survival became a desperate, daily struggle. The world of abundance that had fueled their grand spiritual projects was gone. Building massive stone monuments, a process that required a food surplus and immense communal effort, becomes a luxury you can't afford when your very survival is on the line. The Mustadals weren't destroyed in a great war or a sudden cataclysm. They were simply abandoned. You can almost picture the last ceremony. A smaller gathering than before. The prayers for rain more desperate. The offering made with a sense of dread rather than celebration. And then they left. They packed up what they could and followed the vanishing water, moving south or east, or simply fading into the new, harsher reality. The wind began to blow, carrying the sand that would, grain by grain, bury their great works. The low stone walls, no longer maintained, began to crumble. The sacred chambers filled with dust. Their entire world, their vibrant green landscape, their cattle-centric faith, their monumental achievements, vanished, swallowed by the sand, leaving only these stone skeletons as evidence that it was ever there at all. And so the great Mustadals fell silent. They became what they are today, stone ghosts on a desert plain, a silent testament to a world that bloomed and then vanished, a culture that etched its beliefs onto the earth and was then erased by a change in the wind. What we are left with is a profound and humbling mystery. We have the structures, over 1,600 of them. We have their staggering age, a tradition stretching back 12,000 years. We have clues of their purpose, ritual offerings to a sacred cattle cult. We have the what, the where, and the when. But the ultimate why remains locked in time, whispering from the stones. Why this shape? Why this scale? What stories were told, what songs were sung during those long processions down those stone corridors? The Mustadals are more than just ancient ruins. They are one of humanity's very first attempts to think big, to build something permanent, something that was larger than any single person. They are a 12,000-year-old message written in a language of stone, and we, today, are still trying to learn how to read it. They prove that long before the famous empires we all know, people were gathering in vast numbers, united by a powerful idea, and shaping their world in its image. The sands of Arabia hold more secrets than we can imagine, and the Mustadals are just one chapter of a history that is only now being uncovered. If digging into the deep past and exploring these kinds of monumental questions is something that ignites your curiosity, then this channel is a community for you. We are, in a sense, a team of historical detectives, and by subscribing, you become a part of that investigation. There are many more lost worlds for us to explore together, and your insights in the comments truly help shape our journey. Our next investigation will take us from the dry sands of the desert to the bottom of the Black Sea, where we'll search for the evidence of a catastrophic flood that may have changed the course of human history forever. Thank you for watching.